Hi guys! In this video, we'll be going over case 3, titled Uncharitable Donations. Before we actually introduce this case, just keep in mind that there are 4 discussion questions associated with case 3, as opposed to the usual 3 questions we had for case 1 and case 2. In case 3, Mary is deciding where she should donate her money to. Her initial choice of charity was Kiva, a nonprofit that provides small loans to poor female entrepreneurs, because she wants to help women start businesses and support their families. However, Mary's friend, Sam, disagrees because loans are usually associated with bad outcomes, and because businesses started with loans are usually unable to repay their loans, causing them to fall into debt. Sam suggests that Mary donates to a charity called Give Directly, which gives cash to disadvantaged people with no strings attached. And Sam believes that this organization is a better charity to donate to because it doesn't dictate how recipients of the cash need to spend their money. The following case questions ask about where Mary should donate her money to and why. It also expands into the real world and asks about the moral responsibilities of donors who donate to charities that actually have negative impacts, as well as how people should choose where to donate in general.
It's obvious that Mary is faced with a dilemma on where to send her money. Well, the first question asks, where should Mary send her money and what kinds of things should she consider before she makes her decision? This question incorporates both deontology and consequentialism. It evaluates the morality behind Mary's decision itself, as well as looks into the possible consequences that Mary should consider. Now, the consequences are pretty clear. If she chooses Kiva, which she personally likes better, she will be supporting a chain of negative consequences. These include the often failure of lenders to repay their loans and therefore leaving an unmanageable debt, causing larger businesses to stiffen their growth and driving down local employment rate, etc. However, if she chooses Give Directly, she will have no idea where the money went, whether they went to good people or not, etc. In other words, she is giving out money to a rather unpredictable source. Now, where the money goes, how will it impact the surrounding community and the individual in the long run should definitely be considered. If using consequentialism, she would probably choose Give Directly as it has been reported to work effectively without any notable negative consequences, unlike Kiva. However, coming from her personal standpoint, she likes the initiative of Kiva better and would like to support more women in entrepreneurship. As you might have guessed, if using deontology, both decisions are equally valuable because they both intend to help others. Where she should send her money depends on your view. And as always, feel free to jump out of deontology or consequentialism and just answer the question purely from your standpoint. The second question says, are people who donate money to charity responsible for their consequences of donation, even the bad consequences? And do people have an obligation to do research before donating to a charity? We will look into the first part of the question first, which asks if people who donate money to charity are responsible for the consequences. There are certain ways to go about this. For example, judging from the degree that they're informed and whether or not they're deceived. It is a completely different story if they know the whole truth compared to being deceived or not knowing completely. This may hold them more accountable or less accountable to the consequences. Or coming from a completely consequential standpoint, you would say that yes, they are held responsible no matter how much they're informed because their actions led to consequences. Moving forward, the second part focuses on that degree we just talked about. It asks if people have the obligation to do research before donating to a charity and finding out the whole truth as much as possible. On broader terms, it asks if people have the obligation to know what their impacts are, even if they generally think that impact is good. Now, the following is just my opinion, and feel free to contradict with it or agree with it, but I think that if you are informed with the possibility of charities deceiving you, you should dig deeper into this, because your actions may lead to harmful impacts that you did not intend to do. Or why else would you donate to a charity in the first place? And of course, if the charity's actions does bring negative consequences to the individual and the community it surrounds, that is something that you would not desire, because these people that receive help from charities are often poor, and you would just not want to add even more to their situation.
Question 3 asks if Mary would be less responsible for donating to a harmful charity if she didn't know about the possible harms. There are a multitude of ways you could approach this question under different philosophical frameworks. However, for purposes of this discussion, we will be utilizing utilitarianism in our analysis. As you may recall from our previous discussions, utilitarianism determines right from wrong by focusing on what outcome produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. In this case, therefore, it is evident that donating to a charity that harms the people it is supposed to protect would be considered morally wrong, as it not only wastes valuable resources but uses them to degrade the health, safety, and stability of the individuals whom it involves. However, the fundamental dilemma posed in this question isn't asking us about the morality of the case itself, but rather the culpability of Mary for having unknowingly helped facilitate its capacity to harm others. Although there are many personal positions you can take on this, we will be focusing on two opposing viewpoints. The primary viewpoint would indicate that yes, Mary is indeed less responsible for having donated to such a charity if she was not aware of its harms. Under a utilitarian framework, we all have the obligation to be ethical actors. However, in Mary's instance, she was attempting to fulfill that obligation from a position of ignorance. Therefore, while she contributed to a moral wrong, she did not donate with the intention of doing so, and one could make a strong argument that her ignorance, while destructive, does truly place her in less of a position of responsibility. This would also have to include the fact that Mary is not running the charity itself, and that is the primary responsibility of those controlling the charity as to the outcomes of their usage of resources. On the other hand, one could also make a strong argument that Mary is not in a position of less responsibility. As stated above, utilitarianism as an ethical framework primarily focuses on outcomes. Therefore, one could argue that what truly matters is not the intention of the action itself, but rather the outcomes of those actions towards innocent people. In this case, Mary, through her own ignorance, felt that donating to this charity would produce morally good outcomes. However, it was this very ignorance that resulted in the inverse by unknowingly providing resources to a harmful charity and therefore perpetuating that harm. In aiding the ability for that charity to do so, Mary plays a direct role in how her resources were used to degrade the developing communities, thereby implicating her in a position of responsibility.
Finally, the fourth question asks us, should people try to maximize good outcomes with their charitable donations, or does personal connection to a charitable donation matter as well? Since this question literally includes the words maximizes good outcomes, it's pretty clear that this question revolves around the idea of utilitarianism. Now, if you remember from the first meeting we had after the interest meeting, we talked about two subcategories of utilitarianism that were proposed by two different philosophers. Jeremy Bentham, who is a philosopher during the 1700s, believed that utilitarianism should be evaluated only on a quantitative scale. On the other hand, John Stuart Mill, who was a philosopher during the 1800s, proposed the idea that utilitarianism can range on both a quantitative and qualitative scale. So for example, Bentham would be more inclined to simply saving people's lives, but he wouldn't really care as much about the quality of people's lives. On the other hand, Mill would care about saving people's lives as well as maximizing the quality or standard of living for as many people as possible. For this question, I think it's best for us to use Mill's idea of utilitarianism because while it is good to donate to organizations that save lives, like relief organizations, doing so is also arguably just as important as donating to charities that can improve the quality of people's lives, like charities that support survivors of domestic violence. So far, we've defined what good outcomes refers to, but here's where it gets tricky. The question asks us if we should simply maximize good outcomes, or if we should also take into consideration personal connections to charitable donations. If we were to view this question strictly from a philosophical standpoint, then the best option would be to just maximize good outcomes, because that's essentially what utilitarianism is. But we can also argue that real life isn't completely black and white. The human experience and the emotions that we feel are these sort of gray factors that contribute to almost every decision we make. Now, different people will choose to draw the line between the objective and subjective good in different places, so this is something that we'll discuss during our next club meeting. With that being said, we've reached the end of our Case 3 introductory video. Please email us if you have any questions, and we'll see you guys soon.